my nodding and smiling was actually rather I was hearing a lot of similarities between what people were saying about you and what people often say about pro-Israel activists on the other side. And then I was hearing a lot of the same language used, and I just thought that that was rather ironic. So I was smiling and nodding because of that. I think it's awful that people would use such hateful speech. My question then to you would be, South Africa at the end, if we're going to go, which again I would contest that there is no apartheid in Israel, but that's just an ideological difference. The blacks in South Africa ended up with Nelson Mandela, who was a figure who was able to, in that critical moment of transition, to denounce violence and attempt to bring the country together. If you saw Invictus, as the movie that came out recently, it showed very well how he managed to do that. Do you see any figure among the Palestinians who could possibly be a Mandela-esque figure, someone who's ready to say violence is not the answer, let's move on, let's start to do something like this, because I have yet to see a figure like that on the Palestinian side.
You raised a number of very good points, and I would thank you for them. And I also thank you for your comment that the kind of demonization that I think does go on, you can find it among supporters of Palestinians, and you can find it among supporters of Israel, that we should, to the extent that we can, avoid that, and that we should, I think one of the easiest things to do is to speak, and one of the hardest things to do is to listen, and we should do that to the extent, the greatest extent possible. You're right that Mandela, I think, played a very important role. And I talk about that actually quite a lot in my book, that I think what he was able to do was to be very firm politically, while at the same time communicating very well with whites, in a sense that they were in a position of enormous power that they were abusing, very similar to Israeli Jews, that they have a near monopoly on military, political, and economic power, and they are using it for ill. But at the same time, they're in a position where there is genuine fear about giving up power. And that fear can be, I would argue that part of it is based on kind of a culturalist and racial demonization of the other that I talked about, that Arabs or Muslims are inherently untrustworthy. But part of it is, I would say, normal human emotion, that if we give up power, what will happen to us? And I think that Mandela was able to respond to that in a very principled way. But you're wrong about one thing. He never renounced violence. He maintained the right to armed struggle all the way to the end. But he was very clear about that. And he even at a certain point advocated what he called terrorism. And his basic argument for that was that sometimes people have no other option. But it was never his preference. His preference was for a different means of struggle. And your question is, are there Palestinians who would choose those different means of struggle? And where are they? And I would say they're right in front of you if you choose to see them. And they are particularly there right now in the West Bank. People like Abdullah Abu Rahmeh, Muhammad Uthman, Jamal Jum'ah, and many others who have been leading the non-violent struggle to save their land from confiscation in Bil'in. And many people in Bil'in have been killed for non-violent protests. You may have seen the video on YouTube, the Avatar protest. I don't know if you saw that, it went quite viral. But it's been a joke among Palestinians that with the phenomenal success of Avatar and the apparent awakening of concern among audiences that it gave for indigenous rights, people feel, in other words, the joke is people feel sympathy for the Na'vi. I haven't seen Avatar. For the Na'vi, who are, fictional computer-generated space aliens. But they feel a great deal of concern for their space alien rights, I suppose. You can't say human rights. So the joke among Palestinians is, well, if we painted ourselves blue, maybe the world would care. So last Friday at the weekly demonstration in Bil'in, a group of Palestinians dressed as Navi, and lo and behold, it was on the front page of virtually every newspaper in the world. So they were right. If they dress as computer-generated fictional space aliens, the world will pay some attention. The point here is, if you look at the video on YouTube, they were immediately fired at by the Israeli army with tear gas and rubber-coated steel bullets. People have been killed with live ammunition at those weekly non-violent demonstrations. Virtually every single night in the West Bank, the army is carrying out arrest raids, literally pulling people from their beds, many of them who have been involved in the non-violent protests. So many of the Mandelas are in Israeli prisons. Many of them are on the front lines in Bil'in and Budros and Jayus and other places. Many are in Gaza. We went with the Gaza Freedom March that was organized in cooperation with civil society activists in Gaza, people who acted outside the framework of any political faction, respected people who wanted us to come, and our goal was to march together in Gaza commemorating the first anniversary. So they're there if you choose to look for them. I hope you'll go back and research who Jamal Jum'a and Muhammad Uthman and Abdullah Abu Rahma are, and call on the Israeli government to stop its violence against them. And that would be a wonderful start and a wonderful act of solidarity. And I would say that you should also support BDS, and here's why. Because I think it's very easy to lecture people from afar and to say you should not engage in violence. I don't advocate violence, and I think it's horrifying. I think that's very easy. As you know, that the kind of modern terrorism that we've seen too much of in the Middle East and other parts of the world was introduced by the Zionist activists in the 1930s and 40s. They developed the tactic of strapping large bombs to donkeys and sending them into Palestinian marketplaces. They blew up the King David Hotel, the Semiramis Hotel, and so on and so forth, primarily killing civilians. They felt it justified. I mean, in his book, Menachem Begin, in his book, The Revolt, Menachem Begin is very proud of this. And they apply to themselves the label of terrorist, as do others like Geula Cohen and so on. So they felt that they were justified to do this. But I think the harder thing than condemning people from afar, I mean, if condemnation alone were enough, we would have peace by now, because, you know, everyone condemns violence. The harder thing is to provide an alternative. And I think that really is one of the lessons from South Africa, that there was tremendous violence. But I don't think there is a single Palestinian mother or father who wants to see their child injured or killed or pick up a gun or pick up a bomb. I've certainly never met one who wants that to happen. And so if there was an alternative, people would seize it. So BDS is an alternative. It's an alternative to level the playing field. And it says to Israel that we will impose a cost on you for the status quo. It will not be possible for Israeli society in general to enjoy a perfectly normal life while imposing such horror and misery on others. And that if you change, then the cost will be lifted. But the cost is not a lethal cost. It doesn't require anyone to die. It doesn't require a single Israeli child to go without a meal. It's not like the sanctions Israel is imposing on children in Gaza. So